What's going on, people? Welcome to another episode of Natty News Daily. This is going to be, I don't know, controversial, fun, entertaining. I don't know what to dub the description of this episode, but how
Honest.
to honest, yeah, that's probably the best word to describe it. And this is like something the three of us, and I think a lot of the natural bodybuilding community is very passionate about, and it's how to more legitimize the natty status of our sport and the shows we compete in, the federations we compete in, and all this kind of stuff. So within bodybuilding, within natural bodybuilding, that's specifically what we're talking about. The ability to confirm who is 100% natural is very tricky because there's very few ways of testing that organizations are able to implement, and the validity of those and the volume in which you can test people and all this kind of stuff. And outside of hand over my chest, like I'm not taking anything and passing a couple tests, you still don't know for sure, right? Unless you just trust the word of everybody. And unfortunately, a lot of people try to cheat through this sport. So this past weekend was one of the bigger shows in Canada, and unfortunately, there was a lot of conversation about the amount of athletes that were potentially not natural at this event. And unfortunately, this is probably the biggest show in the country and the biggest platform, and the volume of athletes that competed this show, like there was over 300 athletes. Like it was an insane event, and the caliber of athletes across every division, not just bodybuilding, but men's physique, bikini, figure, every category. There was talent across the board. And some of that got overshadowed by just a lot of conversations about, well, what do you think of so-and-so? Or, this person in the past has taken stuff and now they're claiming they're natural and all this kind of stuff. And I think it just left a lot of the local community, quite frustrated. So just to start a conversation, I posted an Instagram story yesterday saying, what is your definition of natural? I gave 4 options. Option 1 is never taken anything ever. You have never touched a banned substance. Never taken anything the last 5 years. Never taken anything the last 10 years. And tested clean. Then you're natural, right? If you get tested at the event and your test negative, then you're still natural. So the overwhelming response, which I think is kind of what most of us agree with, is that never taken anything ever. And unfortunately, it's not even that like crystal clear, because I've had conversations with people since then where it's like, okay, well, someone when they were 19 did a cycle, they were peer pressured by the football team. Fast forward, they're in their 20s now. Like, is it that big of a deal? And is that even comparable to someone that's blasted gear for 7, 8, 9 years and then comes off and competes? Like, obviously that's where the waters get muddied already. And we haven't even dived into this conversation. But anyways, so the vast majority said never taken anything ever, right? In a perfect world, if every athlete is natural, that means they have never touched a banned substance, right? Most of the organizations go under WADA. So if something's on the WADA list, we haven't taken it. So then I said, okay, how do we make it better? And this is what I want us to talk about, is how do we then go from, okay, well, if everybody is hopeful that no one's ever taken anything, the people that they're sharing the stage with, guys like us, we hop on stage, we're looking around saying, well, I've never taken anything, I assume no one else has. How do we then ensure that to happen? Rebuttal.
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we make this legit?
You treat it just like any other tested sport does, i.e. like the Olympics, right? You go by WADA and you do off-season testing, and you legitimately do off-season testing. Now, I know the argument, because we brought this up with certain organizations that do it but have, I wouldn't say qualms, because they are actively doing it, but the rebuttal to like being able to force individuals to do off-season testing was they have to like be an active member, they have to have a contract signed, otherwise you can't force someone to do so. So I think there's ways that you can do that contractually, right? Like if you're competing in the year, you have to maintain your pro membership. We'll just assume it's pros, right? Because amateurs,
Sure.
that's, whatever. Yeah. There's too many of them, right? So your top level pros have to maintain their pro card status throughout the year. to be eligible. We don't even need to get into like, are they competing or not, but just you maintain the pro status so your contract is valid, which on the contract states, I agree to random spot checks, right? Like throughout whenever. And then you just start implementing them. And I know it's like, oh, we don't have the money for that. That's expensive, blah, blah, blah. But like, I mean, I don't know the finances, but where's all the money going? Right? Like there's a lot of money put into these shows. So to me, it's prioritizing where that money goes, right? Maybe we cut a couple different things here, we get smarter, we get some sponsorships, you find ways to raise funds for an organization when the athletes, aren't competing. I don't know the answer financially, but I think legitimizing natural bodybuilding, you have to have that fear of, am I going to get popped? Like, am I going to go into my gym next week and I'm going to say Bob Bell because obviously we're affiliated with the WMF a little bit and they do off-season testing. Like there's Bob standing there saying, piss in this cup, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, shoot, right? You have to be held honest by that fear of, if I try and cheat, I'm going to get caught.
Yeah. So you implement off-season testing. Now, obviously, that's going to only impact a small percentage of the total number of athletes. So let's take, for example, you have a show with a couple hundred athletes, and over the course of the last 12 months, I don't know, you get an opportunity to test 10, 12, 13 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an option, but it's obviously
That's a,
still only tackling a small
yeah,
percentage of the athletes.
that's away
So,
from the show.
yep.
And then not to interrupt, but I mean, during the show, so they say supposedly in most organizations, they're testing the number one winner. I say anyone that's placing, if we're bothering to put them in a ranked position, they need to be tested. Because if they, oh, they were fifth, it doesn't matter. It does matter because if they weren't there, someone else would be fifth. Right. And like, yeah, like, are we really fighting for fifth place? I think it's really just like, if we're putting these people up on a pedestal, we need to make sure that they're the right people to be there.
Yeah.
So anyone that places in any division that's a pro card qualifying division needs to be tested.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree with that. I think at least like, if you're awarding top three and then overall winners earn pro status or whatever title it may be, then they should be tested. I'm trying to think what else other people responded. Polygraph come up a lot, which is it's tough, but I don't think people look at it like the way that like I would look at it. So for example, like when I think of polygraph test, that shit is terrifying. And if I'm taking something and I know, because the organizations that implement polygraph, everybody has to do it prior to competing. Whereas urine testing, it's only either random selection or the winners, right? So it's, again, a small percentage of the total athletes competing. But if every athlete has to pass a polygraph, if you know that's implemented and you're taking stuff, you're probably going to be massively deterred from entering the show because the likelihood of you failing that polygraph, even if you're able to pass a urine test, because nowadays I definitely know that there's things that can get stuff out of your system very quickly prior to an event. If you're competing on a Saturday, you can test clean by Friday night. You know what I mean? So if they implement a polygraph test and then continue to do urine testing, even if they, still do urine testing just for the winners, every athlete needs to pass some form of testing once before stepping on stage. And then people were coming back saying, well, polygraph's not legitimate and it can be screwed up and all this kind of stuff, which again muddies the waters. Like I don't know. I mean, I've competed now and have been subject to 3 polygraphs and have passed all 3 of them. So my experiences have only been positive. And we've seen multiple organizations that have caught people through polygraph. So I don't know. I don't know if that's
Supposedly, I'll play devil's advocate, right?
for
Like
sure.
supposedly per the polygraph, they've caught them. But there's the
So I
tricky
don't.
thing, right?
So maybe you know more. Maybe you know more than me. So when you're on a polygraph, even if I'm nervous and my heart is up and all this kind of stuff, like, is there a difference between me like being a little bit nervous and me straight up lying on the polygraph? Like, isn't there ways of seeing the difference or no?
I'm by no means an expert at it, but I'm pretty sure that's why they do like a base or should do a baseline round of testing of
Yeah.
questions that you are very obvious, like what's your name,
Yes.
all that kind of stuff, so they can see the baseline level and reading, and then they compare to that for the questions.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember when I did it. I think like I think it was like 3 or 4 questions, yes or no answers, and like James said, it was that baseline. Like, I'm going to ask you some questions. One of them, I want you to straight up lie to me, and then they could monitor those differences, right? Whatever they're monitoring. And then when they would ask, have you taken any banned substances in the last 10 years? No. They have a reference point of that honest answer versus the straight up, like, Leroy, you're 6'10". Yes. Well, me, no.
Mhm.
So
Dan, you're quiet on this one. Well, you rip into the polygraph if you want to. What are your
Dan's gonna
thoughts?
come out right now that he's been running tests since his mini test.
It makes sense. He's too
Secrets out.
jacked. It's the
Secrets
delts.
out. Yeah, I'm a little skeptical on the legitimacy of, the actual efficacy of the polygraph, but I do see it as a deterrent because, yeah, if you're taking something, are you really going to even bother to sign up for a show and take a polygraph? And I mean, to a large extent, incentives aren't quite there to cheat as much as maybe in certain orgs, certain shows, there might be more of an incentive, but generally there's not a huge incentive. But I think you need to have systems in place that when people would be incentivized to cheat, that you do catch them.
Yeah, I think just in, like, even our sport in general, like, what is testing, to what degree, to when, like, all this kind of stuff, like, it's so blurry that there's no
Yeah.
definitive like definition. And that's where, like, I asked in the poll thing, I was like, well, okay, what's your definition of natural? Because then if we all agreed on a definition for it, so say everybody as a collective, the natural bodybuilding community said, all right, lifetime is maybe extreme. All right. People make mistakes when they're younger. Fast forward to, like, someone in their 30s that, again, like I referenced earlier, the 19-year-old that took a cycle during football, fast forward 10 years later, shit happens. People make mistakes. So if we abide by the common 10 years drug free, banned substance free, if we run that as, like, our consistent, how do we then map backwards from our testing standards to abide by that, right? So like you said, they're just like, we're drug tested event. Okay, but when, where, how much, who, by what standard? Like, those are where it's so murky, right? Because I've been to shows where I've had overall winners not tested, and they, by the standards of the organization, should have been tested. Now, I know for a fact that my athletes are 100% natural, but that's not the point. Please test them. Go test them. Uphold the legitimacy of it. Prove them right. Prove them that they're natural, right? Like, I've won shows where I'm like, go backstage and I'm waiting to be pulled aside. No one's there, and I'm like, well, okay, like, drug tested event? Not really. I just won the overall bodybuilding, and you're not testing me. Like, of all people to test, I feel like I should be the one. No. So that kind of stuff is where it just, like, there's no clear cut. This is what we're doing. This is why. This is who, by what degree. None of that.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about, athletes and why they're competing in the NPC, why they're going for IFBB Pro cards, but especially, and I guess it's a slightly tangential subject, but those organizations do run natural shows, and to be quite blunt, their standards for their testing are kind of a joke. I think most of the athletes competing in their natural shows are probably natural, simply because they have two avenues. They have untested shows, they have natural shows. So I think most of the time people that are, using stuff are just going to compete in the untested shows. But it's still like it's questionable the legitimacy of those natural events, and that's something I'm actually kind of surprised they haven't done more with that. But
that's where I think, we have relationships with a lot of people at a lot of different organizations, and I think, like, the three of us have talked about this and can agree upon that if the IFBB really went all in on legitimizing a natural stream, we would see a massive shakeup within natural bodybuilding because of the finances and the infrastructure and the media and all this kind of stuff, like I think you see a lot of heads turn and be like, well, if you're actually giving a legit platform and having these natural shows that are tested, stringently tested, and then you're going to say like, okay, well, if you were in pro status with us, we have ABC Pro shows that are again tested. Like right now, they have the Ben Wieters, which is in the fall every year, and I've talked to people that have competed at that have straight up told me about people that they know because they have relationships with them that are like, oh, like you're competing here, like you shouldn't be allowed to compete here. And this is supposed to be like, okay, well, I've earned my IFBB Pro card naturally. This is my one event as a pro that is supposed to be like my option. Like, I'm not going to go to the Tampa Pro against Hunter or Vancouver Pro against Ian, but I have the Ben Wieters that is supposed to be tested, and then I stand next to Dan now, who's in his mini cut all jacked up, and it just, they have the opportunity to do it, and if they did it, I think you would see a lot of things change. But again, it's okay, well, if we're going to offer this, and then all of a sudden, if there's money involved, like, are you going to see more incentivized people to cheat? Because if the testing standards are still so blurry, even with that clear-cut platform, like you said, with the NPC, the CPA, like we have the two streams, like we have an open and a natural stream, and we still run into this problem.
Yeah, and I think if you're legitimately natural and trying to compete in natural shows, I mean, I think it's a better idea to compete in more legitimate organizations, like the WNBF compared to the NPC. That's my take. I understand the want to compete in the IFBB, but like, a lot of these guys are competing in the IFBB knowing that they're going against untested guys. Like that's a different conversation, in my opinion. Like versus like, okay, I'm going into a tested show, and it should be, I should be, have an equal playing field and everyone playing by the same rules. So it's a lot of times it just comes down to like an understanding of rules. Like, are we all playing by the same set of rules? Do we have a mutually agreed upon set of rules? That's the basis for any sport, really.
That's the problem, right? Is there isn't that, right?
No, it's vastly different, right? Like time that you have to pass, like medical exemptions for certain things in some federations and not in other federations. Yeah, I mean, and that's a whole can of worms, right? Like I get the health benefit from it, but that's not you, right? Like your body is at a certain level and you're taking something to artificially raise it. So whether or not you're within a natural range, that's not your natural range, right? So yeah, and that's what you're saying, right? Like there's 15, 20, 25, I don't know how many different organizations, and everyone has a slightly different thing. And that goes beyond just the testing, right? That's the posing, that's the expectations for show quality and venues, and it's every aspect. And that's where things get so confusing. And that's why, frankly, not that many people know about the sport until they stumble across it and become like really invested in it. I don't know how many people I run into that say, oh, I'm gonna compete in a bodybuilding show, and they're very obviously natural, and you ask them and it's an NPC show, just because that's all they know about. They've never even heard of OCB, WNBF, NGA, ANBF, I keep going, right? Yeah. If you've watched my video that was released about probably a week ago, when this one comes out, you'll know my opinions on this.
It's just tough, man. Like I think like the natural bodybuilding community, because I had so many messages from people that like were very much passionate about like wanting this problem to be solved, and it's just like I don't know if there's a solution. Like I really don't. Like you implement this and that, and like is it gonna solve every problem? Probably not. It might help, but like polygraphs, like, maybe they'll help. Like urine test all top 3, maybe it'll help, but I don't know. I think you'll still run into this problem to some degree, like forever.
Yeah, to some degree, but I think we could clean up the sport, standardize the sport. But that's going to take some work from people in power who actively want to change the way things are, not just sit back and continue as is.
Why do you think people don't make changes? Like, why would someone not, why would like a head of an organization not listen to this conversation and be like, you know what, like maybe there are some things we could do? Why would they not do that?
It's a damn good question. But how many? I mean, we've only been in the sport a couple of years, and I know people have been saying the same thing for a long period of time, right? And a lot of the same people are still in charge now that were in charge then. So maybe it's a matter of this has always worked and this is the way it's going to work. Maybe it's a financial thing because we're so spread out and so dispersed. Each organization doesn't have the financial capability to make the changes. They don't have the manpower to make the changes. So there's probably a lot of different answers. Maybe I'm just biased or cynical and pessimistic, but I don't know. I think that enough athletes are screaming the same thing. But the tricky thing is we don't have the power right now. We can't make a change because there's no alternative, right? I can go compete in another natural org, but it's going to be the same thing. I can go compete in the NPC, but I'm not going to win in the NPC. Leroy, you might, Dan, you might, but not me. Right. So, and then again, you're not building the natural side as much. You're building your brand, you're building your career. Maybe you're bringing light to what a natural can do, but you're not directly helping the organizations, which is what we specifically as a group want to do.
Yeah. Well, guess we'll start our own.
No.
Natty News worldwide, global.
That ain't happening.
First show on Mars.
Worldwide. Don't say worldwide.
Drug tested on Mars.
I would not want to do that.
It's stressful. Yeah.
Stressful thinking about it, honestly. But no, I think I'm beating around the bush. I'm just going to say it again on this video as well. Organizations need to consolidate. If it's a manpower issue, if it's not enough athletes that show issue, if it's a financial issue, every one of those issues is solved by consolidating some of these organizations. And that means putting aside petty squabbles and just figuring your shit out. Yep. Cancel me.
Well, people, if you guys enjoyed this episode, let us know. Comment below if you have suggestions, if you've got comments on this subject matter. I'm sure it would be something to continue to talk about, and maybe just more conversations like this, more comments on the YouTube channel, more conversations on Instagram. I don't know, but maybe it'll bring more attention to it, and the right people might turn their head and go, hey, you know what, maybe there is something we can do about this that would not only help the athletes but help the sport in general. And I think the more it gets legitimized, the more traction it will get, and the more people that will be like, wow, this is actually an option for me as a natural athlete, that I know, I can step on stage and look around and be like, wow, these are all athletes that are in the same boat as me. And I think that just makes the sport better. So if you guys like this episode, give us a like, subscribe for future ones, and we'll see you guys in the next one.